Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca, with co-hosts, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson and community organizing socialist Kenny Cepeda. We are online at what-s-left.webnode.com. Please subscribe, rate, review, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. And turn on your notification. Thank you. Today, we'll be discussing the COVID-19 vaccine / Operation Warp Speed.
Which is really the process of the production of not just one vaccine, but it looks like several vaccines. So we'll be talking about these vaccines and also about this process that the U.S. government is putting behind it called Operation Warp Speed.
Yeah, that was announced in April. Mm-hmm. And when we are now past 9? We're 9 months in, and we have now 2 that have come out in at least part of Operation Warp Speed, because Russia had come out with some, China had come out with some, and even Cuba was developing some. So as part of the Operation Warp Speed, I think it was Pfizer first. No, can anyone help? I think it was Pfizer first. In November, in early November, and then after a week later was Moderna. Yeah. So those are part of sort of I think more Western Europe and USA's operation.
Yeah, Israel also has its own program that's trying to do as well.
I didn't see that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Let's see, Andy, maybe you want to discuss what we discussed on the phone.
Well, so I wanted to talk about Operation Warp Speed because I had read some things that were like, oh, this has got, I had heard about it, but I even before there was talk of vaccines, I was like sort of skeptical about whatever process was going on. But, I read some things about Operation Warp Speed that definitely raised my eyebrows and were like, this isn't all good. This is not, there's something that sounds very, very bad about this effort and very dangerous in terms of the forces behind it and the speed with which it's going and things like that. So I said, hey, we should do an episode on Operation Warp Speed. But I was what I wanted to do was actually not, like sometimes we share articles, but I did not want to share articles. I wanted to, for every Kenny and Eduardo and for me to kind of just do our own research and see what it produced in terms of things we read and things we found out. And it was intentional about that because I kind of suspected we would find different things and wanted to discuss them. And then you called me today and you had a concern, which maybe in some ways you should share, which I think would be the first part of our discussion, which really is about getting information. Maybe I'll let you speak to that concern you raised with me about getting information.
Yeah. I guess for me, the way that my process works is I don't care if the other side there has to be 2 sides or different angles to an issue. And I have to, in order for me to feel confident about where I stand, I need to understand the other side and see and pick at it a bit to see if I'm going to align myself with what I intuitively or maybe even politically or ideologically feel inclined to align with. Many, many times here with both of you, I've shared that I was a former Jehovah's Witness, and it was always one-sided. And I was never able to figure out what was being shared with or shared outside of my own bubble, my community. And I felt I had been gaslighted many, many times because I tried to find out, but you were always you always feared. You were always made to fear. To look into other things because it might be apostate information. So I just coming out of that made me feel like I need to always have a balance to know what's going on. So bringing it back to this, to COVID-19 vaccine, I struggled just trying to get a different point of view on what might be some COVID-19 vaccine concerns. They were pretty generic. There wasn't anything or any voice or dissident voice that was strong enough for me to find out. There was more, it's interesting, there was a lot of criticism against Russia for their development of their vaccines,
Right.
and China, but there wasn't a lot of criticism for the vaccines that were being developed by Pfizer, by Moderna, by these European and US funded companies. And so I just sort of felt as if there wasn't, I wasn't allowed to see. It almost felt like, it felt back being as a Jehovah's Witness, I wasn't allowed to see more past beyond the literature I was given, because that's what we were given as a Jehovah's Witness. We were told, you can ask as many questions as you want. I was told this in my religion. I was told you could read as much as you want, and it's all within either the CD-ROM, which was the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society's own database of information, or the thousands of literature that you were given, or you were, had to talk to people who were more experienced or people who had knowledge.
Yeah.
And I felt that like Google is almost in partnership with the USA, and it almost felt I didn't want to get too conspiratorial, but you can't really use Google or the alternative. What is the alternative, Kenny? Which is Bing? Yeah, I think it's just Bing. And other search engines, because they all seem to be aligned with the USA. I kept seeing similar information be popped. And even when you go to YouTube, there aren't a lot of things I could look up, because they were all just from the media, from the mainstream media. And my mother, even when I was talking to her, she had, like back in March, shared with me some information. I was telling you, Andy, about how she had heard or talked with people who were sort of conspiracists. And I just wanted to check in with her this week and tell her, can you maybe share some of that stuff with me? I just want to know. And she looked up some of the former conspiracists, and she couldn't find them anymore. They had either been, their channels had been taken away, or the videos had been deleted, or they were fearing that their channels were going to be completely taken off, so that they stopped talking about it. So it was such a challenge. I'm not sure how both of you felt around it, and maybe I'll stop here and you both can share your own experience.
Well, I had the exact same experience, that everything felt the same, very generic. I'm not surprised, because I found that same experience with other topics, whether it's like, I was talking to Lipson, like strikes in India, or, some events happening in Latin America, or this and that. We're trying to find, outside information is hard, outside the mainstream. So yeah, I mean, I'm not, the same thing, everything you described, and I find it very interesting that you're framing it that way, as this, kind of like a fundamentalist mindset, right? Like where you are fed this information. If you deviate from it, there's mechanisms to dismiss you, to dismiss your challenges to whatever is being preached. And in this case, it's so effective, or also it might be a factor of time, but because it's warp speed, everything's moving so fast, that criticizing it, it's so hard. And like I don't know if once we get into the details, but it seems like the actual knowledge that you need to criticize is not public. And so you're supposed to take their word, with the people that are involved in this, and there is minor criticism that the media, does, and we will get into that, I think, but this minor criticism, but it's dismissed again. Okay, yes, this might happen, but okay, so basically there's no other option. You're stuck with it.
Yeah, and I think to the Jehovah's Witness analogy is, and the way you described how they're operating, I do believe that's how the U.S. state and our media is operating, and I think that's going to become increasingly more like it in the coming months and year to 2 years. Like, I think it's going to be harder. Like, we're in a little rectangular boxes right now. I think it's going to be, the box is going to get tighter on us, and it's going to get harder to break out of it. We three of us are going to find that our ability to find other alternative information is going to become increasingly restricted. And I think we're not really going to be sure where to go. So I think we have to understand that, like, that's what's happening. And like I told you, Eduardo, this to me is a continuation of the consequence of the kinds of things when the left said, let's go after Alex Jones, and said, yeah, this is, and the FBI talking about Russia conspiracies and things like this has laid the groundwork for this next level. Because to get into it a little bit, one of the major contracts, the major contract that Operation Warp Speed has for who will be Palantir is going to collect the data, but the Google and Oracle are being contracted to help in the collection of data and the processing of data for people who get vaccinated and things like this. And so Google and Oracle have a stake in doing the thing that the WHO is talking about, doing the thing that the World Economic Forum is talking about, the United States is talking about doing something about vaccine, what's that called? Reluctance, hesitancy. So they have a financial stake now in doing that. And one of the things that also is good about this is the contract that Google and Oracle has with Operation Warp Speed is not public. It's a private relationship. And it's also not open to Freedom of Information Acts if you wanted to get it. Freedom of Information Act means you have to get it if the NSA has that information, but you can't use it as it relates to Google and Oracle. And so these are some of the, again, you don't know what all this kind of stuff means. I'm going to tie some other things together, but it's an extremely frightening web that is starting to be built, and it has a very big intentionality to it. So I think those are some of the things, because what I'm going to be talking about are some of the suggestions of really frightening things. But and there are some things that don't add up, but we don't have enough information to know exactly what's going on, except to say that I do not trust the forces that are being put into play in this moment. We're talking the U.S. state, the U.S. military, the CIA, and Big Pharma. These are the forces. Like, none of those people are particularly trustworthy. And then Google and Oracle, which is big data. So this is that you put those together and you tell me you're going to get something good coming out of that. I have real questions about it, particularly given the time frame that things are operating on. So
I would add that what you just did you say this, Andy, or it was the World Health Organization has just added is labeled it as vaccine hesitancy as an issue that's going to be tackled. And I know that Joe Biden plans to join the World Health Organization alongside with other institutions and organizations that will be a part of that overpowering a vaccine hesitancy. And I might just add as well that I'm grappling with, I know I have said some things in the past episodes where I have said something along the lines of, we have to be careful with how, I forget the difference between misinformation and disinformation, because there is a difference right now. I have said in the past that I'm not so keen on conspiracists having large platforms, and doing this research has allowed me to sort of take notice of how I'm not allowed, and it almost gives me an eagerness to find out. And I'm not even an anti-vaxxer. I really do believe that vaccines have saved lives, such as measles or polio. There has been history. Of course, those have also been in long clinical trials. Yeah. But I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I actually took my flu shot recently because I had to volunteer back when schools were open. So I guess I just want to clear that up, that I do support vaccines when necessary, and I do support medical research. I just would like to know what is being hid from us. And that reminds me strongly, as I have already said, that from my religion, where I just feel that the more I'm being held back from seeing what's there, the more I get upset. I want to do something about it. I want to see it. Why don't you let me see? Let me decide for myself how I make with this information. That's it. Well, why don't we get right into it then? Unless Kenny wanted to comment on something.
Just giving an opinion on this, the part, just define what Operation Warp Speed is.
So my understanding from what Operation Warp Speed is this this team of I know it's a private and public partnership that is being by the USA under this Trump administration to accelerate vaccinations by giving in part some of the CARES Act funding that was approved over I think it was the spring or the summer from taxpayer funded money. The CARES Act being the coronavirus, et cetera, I forget. But it's the CARES Act that was giving funding for the prompting or initiation of lots of studies being done on how to create a vaccine at a very accelerated rate. I know some of these companies like Johnson & Johnson had already started to do some of the research because of SARS and MERS in the past. So they had already started doing something in January. And the funding only contributed to accelerate that sort of research being done. But it is initiated by the US government, and it's to accelerate these developments in manufacturing and distribution of the COVID-19 vaccines. And as of now, there has been one that was approved as an emergency use now. I think it was Moderna. No, Pfizer, excuse me, in the UK now. But that has nothing to do with Operation Warp Speed. I'm sorry. I should separate that. Sorry. That's the gist of what my understanding of Operation Warp Speed is. Anyone else can contribute.
I wanted to add that what I understand too is that it's in the purpose of Operation Warp Speed is to vaccinate Americans. It's not an international effort, yes, to come up with the solution, but it is to concentrate on quote unquote, saving American lives. And it also involves not only pharmaceutical companies, but logistical companies like FedEx, to transport and store and all this stuff. And the logistics are, as far as I understand, are centralized and commanded by military officials that are kind of putting together all these pieces. And, so yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing you first said, Eduardo, is the most, in some ways, it's the most important part. The United States, what's happening, and this is as a result of the competition with China. It's a result of the growing multipolar world and these various forces, China, Europe, the United States, all coming into competition. Is we are seeing increasingly this fusion of the state with corporations in order to make things happen. Now, this one is supposedly to help make us safer on a coronavirus. I think there's some other things going on here, but what I do think it really is very telling about Operation Warp Speed is it's not run by the CDC or the FDA or even the human health services is part of it. But when you look, and Whitney Webb did a investigation into who's populating the organization, the leadership positions of the organizational structures. It's almost all Department of Defense people. It's CIA people. It's NSA people who are throughout most of the infrastructure. Most of the health people are involved in the therapeutic area, actually, of the treatment. The area that is getting the least money. That is like things like vitamin D and vitamin A. How would you deal with the symptoms, right? Like, what could you give? But this area of vaccine is almost entirely dominated by the military. What the Department of Homeland Security is big in this thing, and of course, contracts with companies like Palantir, who have been helped to capture illegal immigrants, as well as create software for finding pre-crime scenarios that have helped, put Black and brown people in jail and stuff like that. So, and like I said, contracts with Google and Oracle to help collect the data and to do what is called, and this is in conjunction with Palantir, pharmacological surveillance after the vaccines are distributed, not just to do check-ins. It seems they're talking about a level of surveillance that hasn't been done before, or a level of checking in that hasn't been done before. I think the most fearsome thing people are worried about, and this is where you get into is that like literally nanotechnology is going to be injected into people and stuff like this, where there's temperature sensors and things like that. I haven't seen no evidence of that. We will be talking about some nanotechnology through nanoparticles that are being used as a delivery system for the mRNAs, which are from the Pfizer and from Moderna. But it's been across the board talked about that they're going to do a sweeping kind of study and testing and retesting and surveilling of people who get this vaccine, and they're going to need to, because in reality, the test of the use of the vaccine is being done on the population that's about to get it, because it just hasn't been tested that long. So, I guess that's my first little statement about this.
I think where I will begin with my own feelings around this is that I think this is the first time that some of the preliminary results were released by the press and not published in any peer-reviewed medical journal or science journal that has long been done as custom by releasing anything that's going to be released to masses of people. We're I guess what most people fail to understand when they think it's just fine, this has happened before, things have been released, is that I was talking to one of my family members, and drugs are different from how and even drugs have issues, but I'm just saying drugs are different from vaccines, because drugs are normally given to sick people, but vaccines are given to healthy people as well. So it's at a larger scale than drugs. And if we're already seeing issues with pharmaceutical drugs, then what could be the potential, I want to say challenges, but concerns or issues that we may have with a vaccine that isn't rolled out with strong clinical trials? I know that they have said some efficacy of around 90% for both Moderna and Pfizer with BioNTech, the German company, but it just doesn't seem, something's off when you don't have. And I like a good consensus of scientists, as both of you have known, with like climate change, but there isn't a very strong group of scientists that have actually come out and said that we have actually reviewed this scientifically together. And that gives me, as what the WHO wants to sort of label me as a vaccine hesitant person, I don't think that is something I'm delving into the conspiratorial world. That's more of just, I think any logical concern would have to deal with just needing for us to examine this thoroughly before anything is released to massive amounts of people, and we're talking about healthy people. So that's where that was my immediate reaction, I should say, to it being released back in early November, and then thinking about it long and hard. I don't know. It just, again, we come. Yeah, I don't feel safe.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm not putting you on the spot here, Eduardo, because it is about, we talked about in the beginning of this episode, like what are our sources as just the backdrop to all this. But when you hear, because both Moderna and Pfizer have talked about and put press releases out, corporate press releases, and this is how we know it, because it's not, none of these things have been peer reviewed. corporate press releases that basically have expressed these clinical 3 trials of 95% effectiveness. Now, if you dig deeper, what have you found in your own research about what are they being effective at? Do you know, or do you not know? Like, I'm curious.
So I think it, what I, so I know that there's I was reading that there was a difference between, are they effective at being, so I'm still struggling even understanding some of the science, but
yeah,
being protected by the virus versus transmitting it to another. And for me, I think that they were effective. My understanding is that they were effective at getting the being contagious, being transmitted the disease, the virus itself. I think that's the efficacy. But I'm not so sure if I understood if it was being preventing to transmit to another.
But your understanding of it was 95% chance of me not getting infected, essentially, almost like that kind of along those lines, right? About whether it be transmitted to you versus whether it would be transmitted to somebody else.
I think, yeah, that's where I'm at. Yeah,
Kenny, what was your understanding of that 90? Because that, I think, is most people's understanding of the 95%, and that's not what it is. So, Kenny, what was your understanding of the 95%? Say again.
Similar to what Eduardo's saying.
Okay. So it's not. In fact, Moderna and Pfizer were clear that they're not measuring infectivity as a thing. They're measuring symptoms. So what they're doing is saying that whether you get COVID or not, 95% of the people who got the vaccine didn't show cold-like symptoms. And they were being very narrow in the symptoms they were talking about. They were talking about whether you they were talking about the mild symptoms that are often associated with getting COVID. Did people who had the vaccine show those symptoms? And they were 95% lower in people who had the vaccine showing those symptoms of it, the mild symptoms, versus ones who were in the control group where I guess they showed those symptoms more often. And I think one of the guys basically said that essentially this vaccine, because the things they weren't dealing with were people who had really extreme, it wasn't measuring people in extreme who were hospitalized. It wasn't measuring effectivity around death. It wasn't measuring, it had nothing to do with infections, nothing to do with infections. It didn't tell you anything about how whether you'd be more infected or less infected. In fact, that had nothing to do with the study. It was strictly about looking at the most mild symptoms and whether or not it could mitigate those things. And for that reason, one author was saying, let's see, he goes, prevention of infection is not a criterion for success of any of these vaccines. In fact, their endpoints all require confirmed infections, and all those they will include in the analysis for success. The only difference being the severity of symptoms between the vaccinated and unvaccinated. And we all expect, this is from this author, we all expect an effective vaccine to prevent serious illness if infected. 3 of the vaccine protocols, Moderna, Pfizer, and AstraZeneca, do not require that their vaccine prevent serious disease, only that they prevent moderate symptoms, which may be as mild as a cough or headache. And mortality and those sorts of things are not part of it. So what this thing has been shown to do is very little. And again, only over a short period of time. And there are some people who think that the reason people are showing that is because the thing you actually inject in the people in these mRNAs actually boosts your immune response, because your immune response is responding to the thing that just went inside of you. And so you might have a heightened immune response so that you don't develop those symptoms. And it's only showing a short effect. That kind of effect is only going to be seen in a short window of time. This is why you have to do these effects over a longer period of time. This is also why you'd have to do an antibody test to see if people were developing the antibodies to the spike protein. So this gets into the science of it, to see whether or not it was actually inducing an immune response specifically to the spike protein, which is coded for on that mRNA. So there's what has been shown in this result is entirely not tested or not peer reviewed, but even on its own face is very little that it's actually done, and it has no effect on infectivity, and nor were they saying it was going to have an effect on infectivity. And yet it's very interesting that we've all gone and tried to do a deep dive of research, and you can't seem to get that information.
So it sounds like NyQuil or DayQuil plus vitamin C.
Now that I remember, though, Andy, I forget which Pfizer or Moderna, there were 11 people that did get symptoms. And now that I realize what you're saying, I think it's, what do you call that thing that bury the lead or something?
Yeah.
It almost feels as if that the symptoms of what were, or the efficacy of basing it on symptoms was being buried in the lead. It seems like, for me at least, and because I do remember that only 11, but they were in the media, even unfortunately in some of the liberal media that I was listening to, 11 was still seen as sort of a very low number compared to, I forget how many people they were clinically putting these clinical trials on. So you're inundated with so much information, and you're inundated with so much obscurity of the actual information that you might need to be able to follow up. But I was buried in it. Yeah.
Right. And it's important to understand, I mean, we've all heard prior to this about this 10-year time frame that people talked about as relates to. And why is it a 10-year time frame? It's because you need to do you do get volunteers who have been in the past, injected with a different kind of vaccine, like some sort of peptide sequence or something like that. But you need to do ongoing, not just for a few months, to see what the long-term immune response is, what are the long-term effects of this thing are. That's why it takes 10 years to do this, is you're looking at those long terms before you even get to the point where the FDA will even say, okay, you can distribute this and use it in humans. That's usually the last 2 years where the FDA, after a 5 or 6 year trial window, that happens. So none of this is happening here. And let me ask the other question. How many times, this is mRNA vaccines. How many mRNA vaccines have ever been used before?
I don't know the answer to that.
Zero.
That's not something.
No, it's a known answer. It's 0. This will be the first time mRNAs are being used as a vaccine. And that's an important thing, because actually there's been an immense hope in the United States and within the pharmacological community and the chemistry and the biological community about the possibility of mRNAs being used not just for vaccines of viruses, but cancer treatments. And this is an area of intense, and also the delivery system that they use for the mRNA, which is this nanolipid. It's a lipid. It's a nanoparticle of a sort of a, what's it called, pegylated lipid, is actually the same system that they're trying to develop for CRISPR, so they can use those in stem cells. So if they can get this thing to work, then this is actually extremely lucrative. And this is another area of competition, not just in the area of AI, but in the area of biotech, is this area of CRISPR, of virus treatment, of cancer treatment. So the Moderna and the United States government have a definite stake in trying to win the fight over developing a successful mRNA nanoparticle delivery system, because they believe that they can, and it's possibly true, that it will put them ahead of their competitors in China. And so I believe that's where the rush comes. I believe that's where the military comes in, where the security around all this comes in. It's because essentially the experiments are being done on us. Well, whoever takes it, they're going to be the first round of seeing what is the long-term effect, and that's why they need to collect all this data, because they need to see. And they're doing 6 different viruses. Only 2 of them are mRNA. one's a DNA one, another are different types, and they're just it's really going to be an immense amount of data that they're going to, I believe, use to try to essentially win not just the AI war, but the biotech war with China. And they're going to use us as a population for it, essentially getting information on us as we beg to be vaccinated out of our fear of COVID. What we're really doing is we're all volunteering for a giant experiment that's being done on us, that the United States hopes to benefit out of. And we had an episode on CRISPR, and one of the major delivery systems for CRISPR is going to be these nanoparticles, which is the same thing that's used for mRNA.
Maybe you can share with us what nanoparticles are.
Well, first off, how familiar you are with the mRNA delivery system versus the old system of a vaccine?
I'm not familiar with it. And I should point out to our audience that you are a formerly research scientist. I teach science at high school level now.
Yeah. Except I remember when I took my mask off, they stole my PhD from me.
You're discredited.
I was discredited. And now I'm sounding like an anti-vaxxer. I'm actually now like at a third grade science level, I think. Anyway, so the previous vaccines, well, first of all, vaccines are an attempt to get the body to develop a specific immune response to a protein. And the protein we're talking about is a protein that's on the outside of the coronavirus. Do you remember that? Remember we showed those coronavirus? It has RNA inside of it, and that's the thing that infects you, and it turns into DNA and gets into your DNA. But in order to deliver it, it needs this capsid protein, and there are spike proteins on the outside of that thing. And so previous vaccines were taking pieces of the spike or pieces of the outside. They would inject it into a person, and you try to find not so harmful pieces of those spike. That was like how you do it previously, and see if you can get an immune response to that. And if you did, it was sort of the same thing as you're trying to give a person COVID almost. No, you're trying to give them SARS-CoV-2, but only the parts that are not going to harm you, the very outside. That's how a vaccine works. Well, with the mRNA, what they do is it's tricky because they have to do a few tricks. It's a synthetic mRNA, so it doesn't get degraded by the body. And the degrading by the body also can produce immune response. So they use a synthetic mRNA, and that mRNA codes for a spike protein. But that mRNA, if you just inject that mRNA into a body, you have RNases. You probably would get a big red swelling here, and your RNases would chew up the RNA. It would be gone in a heartbeat. Okay, and RNA often isn't very stable, anyway. So what they have to do is they had to figure out how to put it in almost like a little viral capsid. And these are the nanoparticles that are like lipids, all right, like synthetic lipids that are built that house the RNA. And then also they do this thing called pegylating, which means they put polyethylene glycol chains all on the outside to keep the particle from developing an immune response, because they were seeing that the mRNA was being chewed up, that the particle was creating an immune response in people. So they had to put things on the outside of that thing so it wouldn't make you have such a what's called reactogenicity or something like reactogenicity. That was the word. Okay, reactogenicity to the thing that you're being injected with. So that particle, that emulsion is going to have a bunch of particles with mRNA things in it, and that thing will reach a cell. The cell will open up the lipid particle, and the mRNA will go inside. And then the mRNA is going to use the ribosome machinery of the cell to produce a capsid, a spike protein that's going to be put on the surface of the cell or released into your body. So now you have little pieces of spike protein, and then hopefully your immune system develops in response to that spike protein. If it does, then it means, okay, now I have an immune system responding to the spike protein. If I see that spike protein, I'm coming after you, right? Which means if you get the virus, your immune system will be ready to fight the spike proteins on the outside of the viral capsid. Does that make sense?
So far, I also pulled up an image for myself. So
okay, I'll probably put images in some of this stuff as well. But see if there's a question on any of that people need.
So I suppose why wasn't RNA extracted before?
Well, the big trick was around 2005 was someone learned about what type of chemical changes you needed to make to mRNA so it wasn't immediately destroyed by the body and it didn't create such a huge immune response in you.
Mhm.
So this was done by this woman Kariko or something like that, and many people think she's going to get a Nobel Prize for it. But she learned how to make some chemical changes, synthetic chemical changes to the mRNA to make it something that could actually go into the cell, not going, but that once it was delivered in the cell, it was stable and it would be read by the ribosomes and things like that. The nanoparticle was another piece of the puzzle they had to figure out later.
Mm.
And there are some scientists who actually believe that the reason that people who are getting the mRNA stuff aren't getting colds as much is because their immune response is being activated by the nanoparticle. This has nothing to do with the mRNA. The way you would test if the mRNA is working is you would have to essentially see if the people are developing antibodies to the spike protein that is coded on the mRNA. You'll notice none of that was done. They're not doing any antibody tests. And I guarantee you if they had done I'm pretty damn sure they would have done the antibody test if they expected this thing to give you an infection response. But they're not doing that antibody test because they don't want those bad results.
Mm-hmm. There was another question I guess I had. I'm trying to look for. There was I guess what would be the side effects then? And that's I think what we're learning now since this is new biotechnology. How or what would be? I mean, you wouldn't even know, Andy, yourself. I mean, we're still.
There has been a history to some of the historic responses to people getting treated with mRNAs that have been, and animals have been autoimmune responses, so that your immune system is kind of shuts down, and then they mentioned for the capsid, I think some lupus like effects, and they already have reported from people who got this thing that people like 2% of the people reported fevers of up to 102 to 103 when they got hit with this thing, right? And severe aches and things like that. And that's what they already got. That's just in front of you right now. Is 2% of the population that gets hit with this thing, they're going to have a fever in the day or two of 102. They put it in Celsius, 39 degrees to 40 degrees Celsius, but that's from 102 to 104 degrees. That your temperature is going to be 2%. Also, symptoms of fatigue. About 4% of the people reported symptoms of fatigue. And again, what they're saying is, hey, look, if you can fight that out, right? They're saying if you can just go through that, then you'll get to the other side. But you only get to the other side if you've actually proven that this thing actually gives you an autoimmune response directly to the capsid and to that spike protein. And there's been literally no measurements done on that. All they've done is measured whether or not you got a cold, which has nothing. That doesn't tell you anything about whether or not this mRNA is actually inside of you, churning out the protein so that your immune system is responding to that spike protein. So you might be having 104 degree temperature just so you can not experience a cold if you get COVID.
Do you know if China is doing anything similar to this? That's where I don't know.
I don't know what their
or Russia
are, but I do know that mRNA technology, CRISPR, nanoparticle stuff is very big for the idea of who's going to be able to create the disease cures. But also, as we know, CRISPR was also a way of going after things. It's also a biological weapon.
Yeah. Right. I think I'll sit with that. I don't have any other question. I don't know if Kenny does.
Just a lot to think about. Yeah.
I will also say this. Johns Hopkins, my alma mater, is recommending that Black and brown people be the first people on the front lines of getting this experimental vaccine. And they say it on the basis of racial social justice.
Yeah. I was just going to say that is what is the concern. Well, I mean, I don't know which other company, but there was a lack of diversity in testing in the clinical trials, and I think that is the reason why they also put in more people of color to try to have it. But you're saying that. What are you saying? I mean, what are you implying? I don't want to. I don't want to read into it. What do you imply? You saying that they're going to
a long history, not just from Tuskegee, but even more recently of experimenting on people of color to learn things. And it's like Nazis did the same thing. And we got all upset when the Nazis did it, but apparently our country and, things like Operation Paperclip, where we actually tried to get all those Nazis come over here and give us their information, that's another thing. But this country has a long history of experimenting on the most disadvantaged people. They're talking about it in terms of, we're going to get frontline workers. We're going to give this to people who have mental disabilities. We're going to give it to the elderly. What are they're doing a mass experiment on the most vulnerable population, and frontline workers are going to be mostly people of color anyway. The interesting thing to me is this one scientist who was talking, like this woman, Mikhail Lenil, who there was a scientist in Israel who was talking about, wait, they're really rushing this thing, and of course Israel's got its own reason for saying that, because they're trying to produce their own virus. But this woman, Mikhail Lenil, who is a professor of biological chemistry, she was saying, hey, it's not a problem, as long as people can survive the first round of things, they're good. But then when they asked her if she would take the vaccine, she goes, this is a quote, "I won't be taking it immediately, probably not for at least the coming year. We have to wait and see whether it really works."
After she said that it's not a problem and people should take it.
It's like, these people are shameless. But the mind fuckery here is too deep for me to even, there's so many levels, because now people are begging for this experimental thing that I think really is about the United States again competing for the development of technologies that they think are going to be crucial for the future.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this,
remote learning. Mm-hmm.
Right, and that's in the case of remote learning. But this is another area where the U.S. is competing in the area of biotech.
I guess it's what comes up for me as well is just that there might be. I have a question as to why some of the other pharmaceutical drugs that were being touted by, especially Trump, were being dismissed. If I see the connection, but if no one else sees it, I'm just trying. That's what the connection I see here, because there was a strong, almost unified response to sort of say, no, not that, not that. But there wasn't. There isn't a unified response in a doubt to the vaccines. When I would think that the same sort of questioning that you have towards pharmaceutical drugs should be applied as well to the vaccines.
Right.
And that's the connection I have. It just seems a bit. It doesn't seem. It's a balanced view.
Correct.
When you have very critical voices. Maybe it has to do with Trump touting for it. Who knows? But that's just my observation. Yeah.
I mean, it's in the name of lives, right? You can't dispute that. That's how they sell it, at least. It's another thing that I saw that, regarding the vaccine, I don't know if you have a comment on that, but it's that the efficacy or whatever it's supposed to be is not very high among older people, which is supposed to be the group of people that are dying the most right now, right? It is more efficient among the younger population. So here we are rushing to, inject, kids. And apparently there's, it's also concern about that, right? Like kids, we had episodes on that. So yeah, it's just, I'm just thinking out loud that it's another layer of, here they're gonna inject this stuff into a relatively healthy population that's shown, there's plenty of evidence that shows that we're not as affected as older people.
Right. And the thing that I also think will come with this is we've talked about contact tracing as it relates to, oh, you've got the virus, so we've got to know where you are and things like this. I do suspect that under the rubric of we need to know if once we've given you the vaccine, we need to kind of like keep track of you. This is going to be another part of the surveillance dragnet of collecting biomedical information and temperature information and health metrics that are going to be part. It's like what Allison was talking about. This thing that they're trying to use eventually so satellites can see how cows are moving. This is what's going to be built for us as well. And I can see how a massive vaccine program distributed across the country where the idea is like, let's get everyone under it, which like no one's, for measles, in terms of herd immunity, they talked about you had to get 90% of the people, immune. For flu, they said 30%. Has anybody talked about what that number is for coronavirus? We don't talk about it because they don't even fucking know. And if they did know, I think it's probably fairly low. But they're going to act like we have to get 90% people vaccinated because it's not about coronavirus. It's about profits. It's about competition, and it's about surveillance. Those are the interests in play here. And it's also about building solidarity for the workers to their state, to the corporations, to the military, because we're going to see them as our saviors.
I don't have any counter. I think what I'll do in this episode is I'd like to follow up eventually. I think as it is being rolled out, especially now that they are applying, now that we've even had the UK approve by emergency use, Pfizer, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
And so that's what I am interested in. To your earlier comment, though, you aren't necessarily implying, as some I have heard, that sort of what I think one of my family members was expressing about chips and contact tracing. Are you implying, or are you saying that could be one of the uses of many uses for contact tracing?
For sure, there's been talk of, along with the vaccine injection, you would get a tattoo, a little microchip tattoo implanted as well. That's already being talked about, and those things I think have actually been done in places like Africa, which are really just all this stuff that's happening is really, Africa has been the experimental lab for what's about to come to the United States. And Africa is being used as a biological lab for the forces who are looking to do all this stuff across the globe. And I think those things are a real possibility. I think there are people who believe that this vaccine injection is going to come along with other particles that are in there that are like traceable, that would be in your blood, and that would respond to electromagnetic radiation and give back signals that might tell temperature data and things like that. Those things do exist. I have not heard anything about those things being in this stuff, but again, we don't know. But I don't even think those things don't need to be in the cocktail for the government to get away with putting your name in a database and then on the basis of you having been vaccinated. Now we're essentially going to say we get to have all this information on you. This company Sentinel had previously done this with previous people when the H1N1 swine flu came through, and they did a massive big data collection on all the people who voluntarily said, "Oh, we're willing to be part of this thing." Now I think they're gonna kick it up a step.
I mean, this doesn't have to be on the episode, but I'm just curious is there any relationship, like biological relationship, between Ebola and like this virus?
I don't know.
Okay, just
I don't,
curious.
because I don't think Ebola is an RNA virus. I don't know. I'm not going to say anything.
I had a question for you then. If you are given your science background, I would ask you then if you would even trust any of the vaccines that are being used currently. Some other vaccines have actually saved lives, and that would be. It's hard when you are trying to acknowledge that there have been vaccines that have supported, helped, and done us a good service versus vaccines that are just grouped in with those that have helped us in the past.
I would put it in the same area as, for some of those ones that have been time tested. I would put it in the same area as what Brandy has kind of convinced me around things like surgery, things like, and there are people who think this anyway, but Brandy has really kind of convinced me of this, is like, if I have a problem in my body and somebody tells me I got to get surgery in order to fix it, it might be better if I could find some other way of managing. If I could find another way that was more holistic, that was more about how I stood, how I moved, whatever, then that's a better thing to do. And this quick fix of people's health is a lie, I think. The real way people will be made healthy is to be given good food, good wages, good jobs, health care. Okay. This vaccine thing to me seems like another part of the drug industry's attempt. One, they make money, an attempt to say that we're going to help you, but all they're doing is helping themselves make money. And the flu vaccine itself, I rarely take it because I don't get that bad of flus, and I'm reluctant to go down that road. I'm not going to take a risk if I don't need to. And I think there is a risk when you take these vaccines. Sometimes it might be worth it, but in the case of flu, I choose not to. In the case of this one that's coming down the pike, man, I think all the risks are on the people who take it, because we're the ones who are going to be essentially giving them the data on what are the effects of this thing, because they don't know.
Do you think there is a possibility that they maybe have tested it in secret, like longer term?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think they probably have tried earlier things. I mean, there have been publishers of things. The other thing that was interesting is like things like, the ability of that capsid protein to get into a cell and release the mRNA. Most of those studies were done what's called in vitro, that is, with tissues outside of the cell. They found that there wasn't a very tight correlation between what they did in vitro to in vivo inside the body, because suddenly it all changed. So frankly, if they did do those studies, they did them in Africa, or they did them with, that's another group that another group that Johns Hopkins mentioned was prison populations and illegal immigrants. Like all of a sudden, Johns Hopkins wants to help prisoners and illegal immigrants. And they're talking about, let's get those people first in line for this vaccine. I frankly think that the experiment is being run now. And it's about to come in December 10th or 15th or something.
Yeah. Yeah, my understanding is that, like stage 4, I think, is like the observable, period, right? Like that takes years. Mm-hmm. That's what it sounds like, that this is,
we're about to go through
it. And yes, so we won't know, the results, I guess, until later.
And then there's going to be some people, and here's the other thing that they know about clinical trials. People who volunteer for clinical trials are usually on average healthier than the overall population. So the effect of the side effects things, so-called, is going to be more damaging when you hit the whole entire population. And also the good effect that you see is going to be less. They say in all cases, the good thing that you see in clinical trials is never as good as when you do the entire population, because you're always using a healthier population from your clinical trials. So, it's not even going to be that good at curing the cold once they do it on everyone.
Yeah, I guess that's what they mean by the threat of viruses from China. they want our viruses to be the
right, and it will also mean I do think there's also, I mean, I read into how the United States and China are in a fight to figure out who can collect genomic data on its population. All that shit's in the wind, man. They're fighting over how much they can own us. And the United States is trying to make us afraid of TikTok and China owning us, when our own government is the one that is probably the most pernicious, trying to control us the most. China's doing it to their people, and we're doing it to their people, and China's doing it to us. But the ones we got to worry about is our state. And right now, this is the saddest part. More and more people are becoming more and more like, yes, pharmaceutical companies, save me. Yes, military, save me. Yes, Department of Homeland Security, save me. Yes, Joe Biden, save me. You know, and not seeing these people as the enemy. And that is, that is really unfortunate.
This reminds me of 9/11, you know, massive fear, massive moves, you know, people accepting a unified, basically mainstream media, or media really in general, because even like some of the, you know, sources that I've used to get some information, you know, like that's a little less like mainstream, even they are buying this. Yep. You know, there isn't a lot of questioning of critique being levied against, you know, the study.
And anti-vax statements, anti-vax information is going to be seen like terrorist information. It's going to be identified and shut down. And this, like I told you, Eduardo, I've already heard, I think, another article again from Whitney Webb about an AI program that they're talking about, Prime something, that's going to be started up in March, which is going to, you know, try to sweep the decks of any. YouTube has done a big job of that, because Google, but they're going to try to go much bigger to identify where the vaccination hesitancy centers are and begin to move on them.
This is dense.
I mean, yeah. Well, I think you definitely have to go back to this at some point, but
yeah.
Well, I appreciate you having informed us of what you have researched. I called you to tell you that I didn't have much to either argue with or stand for, that I would just be laying out just the facts, not like facts to prove something. The facts like this happened on this date, such and such. You know, this more so just timeline facts or informational purposes. But again, just to explain something, not to have a position on. And I think that over time, I will sort of develop something over time where I stand. It's challenging, though, to question when you're grouped. And I think this was another part of the conversation that we had over the phone, where even if you are allowed, even if you have some doubts of something, and you might have almost a shared understanding or agreement with someone who might be opposite on other areas with you, if that, like, for example, the anti-vaxxers, who some of them are quite out there, who believe that the earth is flat too, by the way, and other things, but there might be some common understanding or an agreement in an area. By the fact of being associated to that person, or even just agreeing with that person, your other sphere, at least for me, in this case, my liberal sphere, and I'm sure this happens on conservative side, if they, for example, I don't know, believe in climate change, for example, or something, you know, moving away from your group, your tribal group, might just put you in a space where, oh wait, what are you doing? And cancel you out by association. So I don't want to be aligned with the anti-vaxxers. It makes me feel hesitant to be with them, and I don't. Like I said, but I also want to know the full spectrum, all sides. You know?
Yeah, and I think what I would say is, if people have gotten to this point in the episode, they actually should go back to the beginning of the episode and listen to what you said in the beginning, Eduardo, about your experience in Jehovah's Witness. Because honestly, I feel like that's the best model for understanding what's happening right now, like an understanding what's happening to information and what's happening to people being indoctrinated by a much more powerful force than Jehovah's Witness. I personally believe that much more and much more skilled at it and has a longer history with it. So I think people should go back and check that out. And I will also say that look, when they start coming after the people who are anti-vaxxers, I'm going to call myself an anti-vaxxer, because I'm with them. And there are things that if you go,
we're not going to get this episode up.
There are things that if you looked for information on left-wing resources, you're not going to get information on it. No. And you have to go to the right and find some of the stuff over here. They have no idea about how the working class can change society. But I do think they have an understanding about what's happening with these companies that the left is not able to figure out because it's got its head spun up in Democrat, Republican stuff.
Or arrogance in knowledge.
Yes. Yeah.
In the state, I think like the left actually advocates for the state a lot more than the right wing.
They do. Yep.
I do want to say this, that the good thing for us as an experiment is that Lipson is going to be mandated to get a team to teach kids. So we're going to have first-hand data to analyze this.
I do think they're going to put this in front of me. They're going to be like, you want to get back into the classroom? Then you got to get your shot. And I'm going to be in a tight pinch there because I do want to be back in the classroom and I need to be back with my colleagues. Fuck, that's what I'm going to say. So we'll see.
You might just do it knowing that you have to live it out. Be like, this is what's happening. This is an example.
Yeah. I don't know, man.
Who knows? I'm not sure.
No, I hear you.
Let us know what happens then. I imagine it'll happen in years from now.
It might be in August.
You really think?
I think it could be.
I thought that was just for what they're calling frontline workers.
Yeah, but if they're talking about doing anything like they're trying to keep us at distance learning for a year. If they're talking about people returning to the classroom, that very well could be one of the conditions that they set for teachers who do. And particularly since there are a number of teachers who are like loving this vaccine thing. Mm-hmm. The union's position is going to be like, well, you should be vaccinated. It's not going to be like my body, myself. Like, it's not going to be, I control my body. It's going to be the state should.
Yeah, I could see that. Especially as a volunteer, I was made to take 3 shots. So.
Thanks, Kenny, for lifting my spirits.
I'm just excited to see the results.
God damn it.
You should maybe go along with the mask. The mask should be worn instead.
Yeah, look, I'll just say, look, these guys just wear the mask. I'll put that mask over my entire face. I'll be like Cobra Commander.
All right. I think this is good, no?
Yeah.
That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes, wherever you found this episode, if you find it, or on our blog at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find past episodes, hopefully, to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything that you have heard here, please, we beg you now, after this episode, share your favorite episode, rate, review, subscribe to any of our 6 platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcast, Stitcher, Google Play, Bitchute, or YouTube. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-hosts Kenny Cepeda and Andy Lipson. See you next time.
If we're not censored.
If we're not censored, yes.